Welcome to Vacations for Canadians, the podcast. We've got the experience and expertise to help you travel smarter, dream bigger, and make your next vacation unforgettable. Now let's talk about it. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Teena Dowd, owner of Vacations for Canadians. And if you've ever dreamed of experiencing the beauty of Alaska, from riding the Wilderness Express through spectacular scenery, or being in the 17% that actually see Mount McKinley, then this episode is for you. It's the kind of journey that stays with you long after the trip is over. I'm really excited to be joined today by Brendan from Royal Caribbean Group, who knows Alaska CruiseTours inside and out. I've actually had the chance to travel through inland Alaska on an agent trip with Brendan and shared experiences like seeing Mount McKinley and going deeper into the interior, which completely changed the way I look at this destination. So, Brendan, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, it's so good to be here. Very excited to talk today about experiencing Alaska by land and sea.
All right. So today we are talking about what makes Alaska so special and why an Alaska cruise tour is one of the most unforgettable ways to experience this destination, taking you beyond the coastline and into the heart of Alaska. So for someone who may be new to this idea, Brendan, can you explain what an Alaska cruise tour is and what makes it such a special way to experience Alaska?
Yeah, for sure. Very simply, all an Alaska cruise tour is a combination of the opportunity to experience Alaska by both land and sea. Now, when you think about Alaska's coastline, probably an area that you may be familiar with. It's broadly speaking, the Inside Passage. There's different nomenclature for it, but essentially it's the land that sits between Vancouver and Seattle, and then Seward. That's the Inside Passage of Alaska. So some of the incredible destinations that you may have heard of, such as Juneau and Skagway and Ketchikan and Icy Straight Pine and all those magnificent glacial scenic areas of cruising, that is all happening on an Alaska cruise. However, there's this whole other expansive, beautiful area of Alaska, which is the interior of Alaska, which of course you cannot explore as part of a cruise. And a cruise tour simply affords you the opportunity to do that. Now, the way that we do that is that when you're on a Royal Caribbean or a Celebrity cruise, you do that 7-night northbound sailing, southbound sailing. However, that is then combined, packaged with a 2 to 6 night land tour into the interior of Alaska, visiting destinations like Denali National Park or Fairbanks, Talkeetna, Anchorage. All of that's happening on the 2 to 6 night land tour. So there's always the opportunity to do one of two things. Either you can fly to Vancouver, do that 7-night northbound sailing that takes you up to Seward, where you would debark the ship for the 2 to 6 night land tour into the interior of Alaska, and then fly home from Anchorage or Fairbanks. Or alternately, you could fly into Anchorage or Fairbanks, do the 2 to 6 night land tour that takes you down to Seward, where you would join the Royal Caribbean or the Celebrity ship for the 7-night southbound sailing down to Vancouver, and you fly home from there. You could do it as part of a northbound or a southbound experience. But either of those ways is going to really create the opportunity for you to experience more of Alaska.
Okay, so what you're saying is a cruise tour allows travelers to experience not only the coastline, but also the interior, where they can really appreciate the vast state of Alaska with all the wilderness and beauty of the destinations. So can you explain why adding the inland portion actually gives travelers a deeper understanding of Alaska?
Yeah, of course. It's a great question. The way I think about this is to think about what is the drivers of people wanting to go to Alaska. What makes Alaska so special when folks are looking at their summer vacations and they're deciding, do we go to Europe? Do we go to Venice? Do we go to Croatia? Do we go to all of the places that we can't go? Why do we go to Alaska? And the reasons that predominantly people want to go to Alaska is to experience the wilderness and the wildlife and the mountains and the glaciers. Now, there's other reasons as well, but fundamentally at the heart of it, that's what drives a lot of the interest in visiting an Alaska. Now, it's important to recognize that on an Alaska cruise, you're going to get those things. For example, wilderness. When you're in Ketchikan, you can fly amongst the misty fjords, which is surrounded by the Tongass National Forest, which is the largest intact temperate rainforest in the world, spanning 500 miles. That's an incredible wilderness experience that you can have on an Alaska cruise. You get tremendous wildlife. Of course, whale watching in Juneau or Icy Strait is spectacular. You get coastal brown bears when you're in Ketchikan. Icy Strait Point has great bear viewing experience as well. There's a lot of wildlife experiences on an Alaska cruise. And mountains, of course, the coastal Alaska range is all along the coastline of Alaska as you're sailing through. And then glaciers, of course, you're going to get as part of the glacial scenic areas when you're cruising on the southeastern coastline of Alaska. So the simple way to think about it, the simple way to think about the why of an Alaska cruise tour instead of just the Alaska cruise is it gives you more of all of those iconic wilderness and wildlife and mountains and glacier experiences. You get the opportunity for Denali National Park or Kenai Fjord National Park or Kachemak Bay State Park. You get more wilderness. You get more wildlife because one of the great opportunities for the big five of Alaska wildlife, the moose, the caribou, the grizzlies, the Dall sheep, and the wolves, that's in the interior of Alaska in Denali National Park. And you get more mountains because the tallest peak in North America, Mount McKinley, which when measured from our base is bigger than Everest, the real opportunities that you have for those incredible views is going to be in Denali and Talkeetna, which is in the interior of Alaska. And when you're on a cruise tour, you always have the opportunity as part of select cruise tours to go out to Kenai Fjord National Park, where the Harding ice field feeds some of Alaska's most impressive glaciers. So you get more of all of the wilderness and the wildlife and the mountains and the glaciers that makes Alaska so special when you do a cruise tour instead of just the Alaska cruise.
That's really great. And we often hear about Denali National Park as being one of the highlights on a cruise tour. So what makes Denali such an unforgettable part of this cruise tour?
Wow, Denali is just a very, very special destination. Now, it's a little bit different from a lot of the national parks throughout the US in that private motorized vehicle transportation is prohibited to go into Denali National Park. So when you go to places like Big Sur or the different national parks around the US, you can drive your private vehicle into the park. Now that creates more people, that creates more vehicles, that prohibits the opportunity to have some of those wilderness and wildlife experiences. It's different in Denali. In Denali, they prohibit private motorized vehicle transportation beyond a certain point. So beyond a certain point, which is really the meat of the park, the only way to get into the park is by foot, by bike, or on one of the buses, which either the park services or their vendors are providing. And what that creates is an experience which is more real wilderness because you don't have all of the people and the motor cars that are throughout the park. It creates more of those real wilderness experiences. It creates more opportunities for the wildlife. The real focus of Denali National Park was for it to be a wildlife refuge. And so prohibiting the private motorized vehicles to go into it created that. So as you go into the park, that creates then the opportunities for you to have those views of the big five of the Alaska wildlife that I spoke about. The tundra and the taiga there is spectacular. And the deeper that you go into the park, the more opportunities that you're creating yourself to get those one-of-a-kind views of the tallest peak in North America, as I spoke about, Mount McKinley. The further you down that road that you get, the bigger the mountain gets and the more opportunities that you're creating for yourself. So as you go into this park, you have these really unique wilderness experiences. You have some of the opportunities for the big five of Alaska wildlife, and you have more opportunities to become part of what we roughly call the 30% Club, which is ostensibly the percentage of people that go to the interior of Alaska and get those one-of-a-kind, incredible, popping views of Mount McKinley.
Happy to say that I am in that 30%, and what an experience that was. Our bus driver just kept pulling over. It was like it was the first time he'd ever seen it. He was so excited every time we turned the corner and saw that peak of Mount McKinley. That was amazing. So when we talk about cruise tours, we often highlight things like the Wilderness Express or views of Mount McKinley or even reaching Fairbanks. So, what did these experiences bring to the Alaska cruise tour?
Yeah, I mean, like so much of this is how you experience it. You talk about the Wilderness Express, which is, we can talk about that. So it's an incredible luxury rail experience, or the differing opportunities to go to the differing destinations like Fairbanks or Alyeska, just the most incredible property anywhere in Alaska. The interior of Alaska is vast, and the ways that you explore it are going to be very different depending on how you want to do that. So at Royal Caribbean and Celebrity, we're very specific in terms of the ways that we want to experience the interior of Alaska with our guests. So one of the ways that we experience it is that on every single Alaska cruise tour, there is a segment on the Wilderness Express rail carriages. Now, not to get too weedsy about this, but the interior of Alaska, there's one state-owned organization, which is called the Alaska Railroad. They own the engines, they own the rail lines. However, the rail carriages themselves are either state-owned or independently owned. And they really run the gamut. You have pretty standard everyday commuters that are rail carriages, you would expect them, up to luxury, beautiful domed rail carriages that you could experience traveling through the interior of Alaska. And we simply use the best that's there. They're called the Wilderness Express rail carriages, 80 persons up top, luxury, wide, well apportioned leather seating, a bar service to the seats with specialty cocktails or beers or coffees or whatever it is, beautiful domed roofs to enjoy the scenery as you're traveling through it. Down below, there's a restaurant with freshly prepared meals by a chef on board the rail car that day. This is just an amazing experience. So every single one of our cruise tours includes a segment on board the Wilderness Express. Many of our cruise tours have multiple rail segments. One of our cruise tours, cruise tour number 8, travels exclusively by Wilderness Express all the way from Anchorage to Fairbanks. So you can think about, hey, how do I want to experience the interior of Alaska? And select those components that are going to really deliver on the experience that's important to you. Another example of that is Alyeska. Lots of different lodgings that are available in the interior of Alaska. One of the lodges that we stay at is Hotel Alyeska, which is simply the best property in Alaska by a mile. Like nothing comes close. It has heated saltwater swimming pools and a Nordic spa and a 7 diamond-star restaurant, four diamond-star restaurant at the top of the mountain. It is incredible. So we want to stay there. We want our guests to have that experience. We want them to have the experience on the Wilderness Express. There's different ways that people approach exploring the interior of Alaska. And that approach is going to be really meaningful in the experience that you have. And you want to be conscious of that who you're selecting to do a cruise tour with, to have that experience with, is in line with the type of experience that you want, because it could be vastly different.
So, we really enjoyed the Wilderness Express. But one of my all-time favorite excursions was when we flew by plane to a glacier and had the amazing opportunity to walk on it. It really was one of those moments I will never forget. Brendan, what is some of your favorite excursions or experiences from your experience with cruise tours?
That's a great question. And I think it's so important to say because, for example, when we talk about Denali, right, we talked a lot about Denali National Park and the tours into the park and creating the opportunities for the big five of Alaska wildlife. Well, Denali is so much more than just the park and so much more than just the tours that go to the park. And part of the way that you experience that is with the optional excursions that are around Denali. And then, of course, there are the optional excursions in Talkeetna and Seward and all throughout the interior of Alaska. So there's lots that I love. Cruise tours includes key experiences as standard. They're built into the land tour product in order to ensure that our guests are having great experiences. But there's lots of optional excursions for them to choose from as well. Some of my favorites in Denali, I love rafting down the Nenana River. This is the Nenana River is a river that flows through Denali. The degree of rafting or the rapids, excuse me, is kind of dependent on the summer glacial softening of the Nearctic Glacier itself. But it means that it can either be a gentle float or a whitewater ride, but you're out in the wilderness, you're separated from the hustle and bustle. It's just an amazing, amazing experience. I love going to the dog kennels that are dotted in the wilderness of Denali area. One of my favorites, Doggone It, great name, is a couple who homesteaded in the wilderness of Denali, and they built this property with their own hands, where they trained the puppy dogs in the summertime to run the famous Iditarod race in the wintertime. The wife manages the team, the husband runs the race, and they invite people into their facility to see how they live their life, see how they train their dogs. And of course you get to hold the puppies. It's, just very, very cool. And then, as you point out, flight sightseeing in Alaska is very special. And that's true on the coastline as it is in the interior of Alaska. Everyone should take an opportunity to see Alaska from up top. Now, whether that is flight sightseeing or taking a cable car to the top of a mountain or hiking to the top of the mountain, if you got the legs for it, there's such beauty in the different perspective that you get when you look from on high. So in the interior of Alaska, yes, any of the Denali flight sightseeing, particularly those, as you experienced, Teena, that land on a glacier, are really, really special, because to get those views of the Hunter Range, or most prominently Denali from up high, is really special. But so many different amazing experiences to be had in the interior of Alaska as part of the optional activities.
For sure. So for someone who's planning their first Alaska cruise tour, or maybe it's a one and done for them, what's that one excursion or experience that you say cannot be missed?
I don't think there's one excursion or experience, because I think people are different, and what is going to be important to them is different. And the way that I would approach this experience is that I would start off with some key questions, not necessarily about what I feel, but what they feel. And so the first question that I would ask myself is, how long do I have to have an amazing vacation experience in Alaska? Because everything in Alaska is a quintessentially natural experience, right? The mountain needs to be out. The bears need to be there. The whales need to be bubble net feeding, or whatever it is. It is a natural experience. And the longer that you go to Alaska for, the more opportunities that you create for yourself for those magical, natural moments to happen. So how long do I have to have an amazing vacation experience in Alaska? That's your starting point. Now, whatever that is, it could be 10 nights, it could be 11 nights, it could be 12 nights, it could be 13 nights, whatever it is, it is. But go with the most time that you have to have an amazing vacation experience. I would then start there and say, okay, if the most I have is, for example, 12 nights, what are then the 12-night options that are available to me as part of the cruise tour products that, if we're talking about Royal and Celebrity, the cruise tour products that Royal and Celebrity offers? I would then look at those cruise tours, and I would ask myself some really key questions about what is most important to me. For example, do I want to spend a couple nights in Denali National Park? Is that important to me to spend more time there? That's going to narrow down the options. Do I want to, include the longer tour into Denali National Park, the Tundra Wilderness Tour that goes 40 miles into Denali National Park? What if that's important to me? That narrows down the options as well. So asking some of these key questions: 2 nights in Denali. Do I want the Tundra Wilderness Tour? Do I want to go all the way to Fairbanks? Why is that important? Because between Denali and Fairbanks, you got about a 4-hour travel segment. And so by going there, you have less time down in the kind of Denali, Anchorage, Alyeska, Talkeetna sort of an area. So are those experiences in Fairbanks meaningful enough to me, important enough to me, that I want to go all the way to Fairbanks? So by asking some of those key questions, what that's going to do is going to narrow down the cruise tour options to one that is going to create the best opportunity for you to have the experience that's meaningful, important to you. That's the way I would go about selecting individual cruise tours.
So I'm going to say yes to Fairbanks, because otherwise I never would have got to walk with the reindeer.
I love Fairbanks. Yeah.
So, one of the highlights that we experienced on the agent trip that I was on was seeing how seamlessly Royal Caribbean organizes the land portion. And all of that really stood out to me because it actually allowed me to experience Alaska and not worry about coordinating all those pesky details.
So, as you remember, Tina, it was a whirlwind. So, when we do our trips, when we bring our valued travel partners along, we are trying to show as much as humanly possible in the 5 days that we have allocated. So, just to say that we would never put our Royal Caribbean or celebrity guests through what we put you through, Tina. And thank you for putting up with me and putting up with that schedule for 5 days.
No, I appreciated everything we got to see. It was fantastic.
So we saw a lot. We did a lot in that. We break it up a lot more as part of our regular cruise tour programs. There's a lot more space, a lot more time, a lot more places to excel and breathe and enjoy as part of that experience. But so yeah, what you experienced was fundamentally what makes a Royal Caribbean and a Celebrity Cruise Tour so unique in terms of the experience that our guests have. So one of the things that you experienced was that you had a dedicated tour guide, and that dedicated tour guide was with you for the duration of the land tour. That is exactly the way that we operate our cruise tours. When our guests fly into the interior of Alaska, they're met by one person, a dedicated tour guide. And they introduce a dedicated motor coach driver who shows them they're dedicated to motor coach. That's what you had. That's what our guests have. And for the duration of the lane tour, that tour guide, that driver, that motor coach is dedicated to them for the duration. Now, I think, Tina, we had about 45, 46 people on our motor coach, which is roughly equitable to how many folks we typically have on one of the dedicated motor coaches on our cruise tours. Now, everything that you experienced in your interactions with them is what our guests would have experienced. What did she do for you? She talked about the dining recommendations. She booked the optional land excursions. When you arrived at the property, you didn't have to walk off the motor coach and go stand in line for your key. That was handed to you by your tour guide so you could go straight to your room. What did your driver do for you? Kept you safe on the road, of course, but they also transported your luggage from the motor coach to the hotel room. So when you walked into your hotel room, it was there, or was there shortly afterwards. And the next day, you just put it out in front of your hotel room, and it got brought back down to the motor coach and loaded there. So it's that combination of driver guide team that really deliver on the experience. It enabled you and it enables our guests just to sit back and enjoy the experience and take it all in, and not having to be fretting or worrying or concerned about, is this my motor coach? Is this my driver? Is this the what bus I'm meant to be getting on? What's meant to be happening here? You have a person who is structuring that whole thing and making sure that it's operating smoothly. The other elements are some of the things that we spoke about, which is, how do you select the transportation? How do you select the lodgings for your guests? There's a lot of lodgings in the interior of Alaska. So the lodges that you do use are really, really important. There's a few things that are important to Royal and Celebrity, and that's that we always are going to be in the destination that delivers on why our guests wanted to go to Alaska in the first place: the wilderness and the wildlife and the glaciers. When they're there, we're going to stay in the best property in the area, and crucially, they're going to be close to local communities. So I don't know if you had the opportunity to, while we were in, for example, Talkeetna, Tina, but the transfer to go from the Alaskan Lodge to downtown Talkeetna was like 5 minutes. It's really close. You get down there, you can spend time with bush pilots who are going up into the sky during the day. It's a cute town. Like, you have the opportunity to have experiences with Alaskans in Alaskan communities. There's only one other major property anywhere in Alaska that has those incredible views that you got from the back of Talkeetna or Alaskan Lodge, and that's the Princess McKinley, which is an hour away from downtown Talkeetna. So, we're always going to use the best property that's there. Talkeetna or Alaskan Lodge, Alyeska, Pike's Waterfront Lodge. We're always going to use the best property that's there. We're always going to be close to local communities. And that really builds on the experience that our guests have. And then lastly, we spoke about this a little bit, but transportation is huge. Like, you're traveling distances in the interior of Alaska. Think about this in terms of geography. Vancouver to Seward is roughly, let's call it about 1,200 miles as the crow flies. Seward to Fairbanks is roughly another 500 plus miles. So how you traverse that 500 plus miles is a big, big deal. As you saw with the motor coach, we use beautiful Prevost motor coaches, bathrooms on board, really luxury motor coach transportation. And then I already talked about the rail experience. I'm not going to get into it again, but another huge part of the experience as well. So, you know, making those choices about dedicated tour guides, about dedicated motor coach drivers, about dedicated deluxe motor coach, using the best rail carriages in Alaska, staying in the best available properties in the area, ensuring we're close to local communities, that all cumulatively builds an experience. That's the experience that we want to offer. It's not the only experience that's there, but that's the experience that we want to offer at Royal Caribbean and Celebrity.
Wow. So, knowing how popular Alaska cruise tours are, how far in advance should someone start planning to get the best cabins and be able to pick their cruise tour itinerary?
You want to be looking further out. I'll just talk about booking windows. Like typically what we see is the strongest booking window that we have for the cruise tour product is roughly 10 months before sailing. That's typically when we see most folks are booking their cruise tours. Now it's down to a number of things. Inherently, we just have a lot less space available in the interior of Alaska than we do on the ship. There's less motor coaches, there's less rail, there's less hotel space than there is ship space. And that's just kind of the way it is. So we're working with lesser capacities in the interior of Alaska, and that just subsequently means there's less cruise tour product to work with. But also there's a lot more planning involved. People want to think about things more. It's not just getting on the ship. You're deciding from in the case of us, we've got, 12 unique differing cruise tours ranging from 9 to 13 nights. So people are engaged in that process of understanding what is the best option that is available for them. So because we have less there, because it requires more planning, it's an open jaw sailing. So you would be flying into one place, flying out of another. There's a lot of different cruise tour options. If you want as many options available as possible, then you do that a lot earlier. And part of the reason for that is the way the ships are operating is that under the example of Celebrity, in 2027, it'll be the solstice. It does Vancouver to Seward and then Seward down to Vancouver, right? So it's only going in a northbound direction as an example twice a month. So if you want a northbound sailing, you are limited to essentially 2 departures a month. You then build on top of that the limitations in space in the interior of Alaska. You get to what is a fairly limited product. That doesn't mean there aren't options closer in. There are always options closer in. However, if you want the full scope of availability in terms of cabin availability, in terms of individual cruiser availability, to be an option for you, then you do need to look further out.
That's great. It gives us a lot of things to think about. All right, Brendan, one more question. Northbound or southbound?
I don't think there's a right and a wrong answer to this. I think a lot of folks end up on the side of a northbound or southbound cruise, and they have very strong opinions about it. And that's fine, but it is an opinion. An opinion is part of having a perspective, and perspectives are fluid, and it depends on the individual person. So the way I prefer to position this is more of think about the different perspectives, and then think about whether those perspectives are relevant for what's important to you. So let me give you a couple of examples. Most people will hear that a southbound cruise tour is better. I think that's the predominant kind of messaging out there. And the idea about a southbound cruise tour being better is because you have the hustle and bustle of the land tour, and then you get down to the ship and you get on there and you relax on your way down to Vancouver. I get it. That's a perspective, and it's a very valid perspective. However, I prefer northbound cruise tours. And the reason I prefer northbound cruise tours is that, for example, on a southbound cruise tour, the ones that, most folks will talk about, where are you flying to? Well, you're flying to Alaska, either Anchorage or Fairbanks. Now, that's going to be a longer flight. I personally do not fly well. When I'm flying with my wife, as the plane takes off, she falls asleep and sleeps the entire way. And then just as we land, she wakes up, and I've been awake for 9 hours with the kids watching Marvel movies. And so I don't fly well. So if I'm going to fly a longer place, like to Fairbanks example, It's a longer flight, and when you get there, it could be a red eye. A lot of red eyes go to Fairbanks, probably going to be anywhere from 20 to 24 hours of sunlight when you get there. And then at 7 a.m. the next day, let's start the land tour. Like, that's a lot for me because I don't fly well. However, for someone that flies really well and gets well rested, it's going to be no problem at all. Now let's look at a northbound cruise tour where you flying to or starting from Vancouver. It's going to be an easier flight, just any which way. What's the first day of every cruise that you've ever been on? It's a sea day. You just relax. And so if there is any acclimatization needed at all, you're doing it on the cruise as you go up in a relaxing environment, as you go up to Seward, by which point, when you get to Seward, you are acclimatized and you start the land tour and you're fresh and you're ready to go. So I prefer northbound for that reason. Other people prefer southbound for the reasons that I spoke about. I wouldn't say one is better than the other. They are the same thing inherently in terms of what's included, but depending on what's important to you, a northbound or a southbound cruise tour may be better for you given your preferences for travel.
So, if today's conversation showed us anything, it's that Alaska isn't just a destination. It's a forever experience. From sailing past towering glaciers to riding the Wilderness Express and experiencing the majesty of Mount McKinley, Alaska truly offers something you can't find anywhere else in the world. So, Brendan, thanks so much for being here today with me. Do you have any final thoughts?
Mostly go to Alaska. Like, we would love to take you there. As Celebrity or Royal Caribbean, we think we'll give you an amazing experience. But more than that, just go to Alaska. However you do it, whoever you do it with, just go to Alaska because it will be an amazing experience.
So I guess that's why I've actually got my 5th cruise to Alaska booked this summer. We just can't seem to get it all in.
You got it. Thank you, Teena.
So if an Alaskan cruise tour has been on your bucket list, or if today's episode sparked your curiosity, our team at Vacations for Canadians would love to help you plan that perfect cruise tour. Visit vacationsforcanadians.com or reach out to our team to start planning your Alaska adventure today.